At 2:40 a.m. on November the 11th, 2016, probably the most unbelievable electoral result in history was confirmed. The tickers on the bottom of the TV and cable screens clicked by 2:70, and America had elected its 45th president. What had happened was a remarkable achievement of what's at the core of marketing and what's at the core of politics, which was a remarkable achievement of persuasion. Now, the thing about persuasion is there's actually two types of persuasion. One type of persuasion is about stringing together a set of facts based on a set of assumptions in a logical sequence. And the assumption is that once you've articulated the logic, that people will be persuaded. But there's another type of persuasion, and that type of persuasion works with engagement. It connects with people's emotions and it moves them from one place to another. And if the emotional transformation is one that they want to feel, they're going to be completely committed and persuaded. So let's call the first type, the logical type of persuasion, blue rhetoric, and let's call the second, less familiar, red rhetoric. And given that it's not understood very well, what I think is worthwhile is to look at how this red rhetoric works. And the way it works is it is built on a deep intuitive understanding of the foundational stories, the myths and legends of a culture. So essentially, a skilled user of red rhetoric, red persuasion, draws on the foundational stories, films, myths, narratives of the culture. I'd like to suggest that the 45th president actually drew on a number of these foundational myths. And there are three primary ones he drew on. One that was extremely familiar in American culture, and you could argue that it's the foundational myth, and it's the cowboy film. The essential structure is a homesteader or a town, small town, in a remote area is in trouble. And it's in trouble because there are forces that threaten the homesteaders or the community. And those forces are beyond the capability of the homesteaders to address. And what happens is, into town comes, on a horse, a strong man. And that strong man does whatever needs to be done. And when you look at who the strong man is, inevitably the strong man is a flawed hero. And the homesteaders don't really ask what kind of a character is, because essentially what they're wanting is a killer, a firer, to do what needs to be done. And according to the gun law at the time, the baddie's killed and order's restored. And that's the essential plot of the story. And the 45th president is like a New York cowboy. And if you look at the campaign events, what would happen is that you'd turn up and there would be enormous security at the event, indicating there was a threat, there was something to be frightened about. And then people would arrive an hour or two before and they'd go in, and there'd typically be an announcement saying, "Watch out, there's danger among you." So it was quite explicitly evoking a climate of fear. And what then would happen is, in would come the strong man, and what would happen is he'd point out a threat, which the crowd would then get incensed and angry. And so they'd gone from a situation of fear and powerlessness to feeling empowered again. And one of the things you do remember is how the story and the hero leaves you feeling. And in a way, he evoked that brilliantly. A second foundational myth is from a biblical source, which is that the people are entrapped and suffering under unfair taxation and unfair rules and unfair restrictions. And this, of course, is what the Egyptians were doing to the Israelites. And what happened then was Moses leads them out of the heavy regulations that are imprisoning them with divine help to a promised land. And there were fairly frequent references during the campaign. Well, one of the things he would have said is Jeb Bush won't lead you to the promised land. The implication was that the 45th president would lead you to the promised land. And the third primary narrative would be that poor boy can end up doing good. And in a way that was the structure of his long-running series of The Apprentice. And poor boy do good, poor girl do good, go from poverty to wealth was right at the core of the narrative of The Apprentice. So here we have it, the flawed hero, gunman, cowboy, the Moses, and the apprentice story, which tapped into three absolutely foundational American myths. Now, secondary and important is that in all of those you had to define the forces that were threatening the community. There's an imagined aggregated other that's threatening the community. The threat is beyond the capability of the community, needs strongman to come in and rescue them through taking decisive action, shooting, killing the threat. In a way, the 45th president is the strong man. And the fact that he's flawed, in the context of the threat, the homesteaders do not care. Now, in another context, they might, but in the context of the threat, they don't.
I don't think this is a job for the Rangers, Buck. Nor for the Army, sir. It is, I think, going to be a very harsh and unpleasant kind of business. And will, I think, require an extremely harsh and unpleasant kind of man to see to it.
Now, what did Hillary do in relation to this? To be honest, in relation to red rhetoric, she didn't really use it. Nothing in her experience prepared her for what was happening. Because what was happening was a red rhetoric attack, and she was trying to deal with blue rhetoric. And the point about it is, if you understand red rhetoric and how it works, you can't change feelings with facts. And people feel before they think. So trying to confront red rhetoric with blue is completely ineffective. And that's what neuroscience tells us. And what are the implications of this for marketeers? Well, essentially, to recognize there are two forms of rhetoric, red rhetoric and blue. And when you're dealing with a situation like in fast-moving consumer goods where people aren't giving a lot of attention, they're having to make a quick decision on a small amount of information, they typically have recourse to symbols and metaphors and stories that help them simplify the complexity in front of them. And if you know what those symbols and stories and metaphors and myths are of the culture, and you draw on them, you can give people a kind of shorthand to make a red rhetoric decision if you can juxtapose what it is you're trying to sell to them, be it vote for me or buy my product or buy my service. You can very effectively, in a way, engage with them through red rhetoric. When you're campaigning, you primarily need red rhetoric. When you're running a country, you primarily need blue. Now, it's handy to have both, but in a way, the 45th president, I would argue, was just a superb practitioner of a form of red rhetoric that drew, as we've seen, on many of the foundational myths, whereas his opponent was playing blue rhetoric trying to counter red rhetoric with blue, and she didn't realize you can't change feelings with facts. So for those people who'd been engaged through the campaign rhetoric and the campaign events, they were devoted to the hero, the strong man. They loved it, and they still do, because in a way, that the way he's governed subsequently, he's essentially stayed completely consistent with narrative logic, with the logic of red rhetoric.
I have visited the laid-off factory workers and the communities crushed by our horrible and unfair trade deals. These are the forgotten men and women of our country, and they are forgotten, but they're not going to be forgotten long. These are people who work hard, but no longer have a voice. I am your voice.
And more than anything, he was offering hope to people who, particularly in rural Midwest, ravaged communities, he was offering hope